Uh, One thing is mind mapping. In mind mapping, main thing is you think about the main idea, and from there think about everything else. So let's say you want to make a platformer game. So your main concept is platform. So that will be your main idea. And from there, think about what the setting should be, what the objective is, what player, how is your, like, what is your main player character? What is his motivation or what is their motivation? What are all of the other elements that you have? What is the style of the game? And from here on, let's say you've decided on a platformer game and it's uh, set in a fantasy world, let's say, who live in the fantasy world. What is their relation to our main character? How do they impact the story? In this way, you can go on and build a mind map of your idea from starting main mechanic or starting small idea. Let's say you want to make a game which is fun is a very broad idea, but let's say you want to make a game where the main character is a vegetable, let's say. So how do you start from here? What do you do? What's the setting of the game? There might be a vegetable in the kitchen trying to escape the chef and want to survive. That could be. So why is he escaping the chef? What how does he escape the chef? Are there any other way people like any other vegetables or any other fruits that help our main character escape? What is the end? What will he get after escaping? What will happen if a character doesn't escape? All of these stuff you can map them out as a mind map, and with these you can start brainstorming ideas. This is a really good way, but you need a small starting point from which you can build upon your mind map. And I'm telling you guys upfront, uh, brainstorming ideas, and especially in game development, is a really time-taking task. Unless you want to make a really simple game with a single core mechanic and no bells and whistles, making a good game, making an exciting game, it's actually really hard. So you think of an idea, you think about whether it works or not. Problem is, even if you like the idea and even if you feel like it will work, many other people might not have the same feeling. Ultimately, uh, the main idea of a game is for it to be fun and entertaining and for other people to play. If you are the only person who enjoys the game and that was the main goal, that's good. But to actually make a commercially viable game, you need to have other people also resonate with that topic or be interested to at least explore that topic. So it'll take time. Just you can't do it in 5, 10 minutes. It'll take time, but it's actually worth your time. So otherwise, our player motivation. So by player motivations, what I mean is what is the reason for our main character to be in the game and play the game, or our player to play the game. Let's say a player is struggling with their finances in real life. That's it. So what's their goal in real life? The goal will be to be able to manage their finances properly, be able to maybe build up on their wealth, stuff like that. So using that motivation, you can build a game where your player starts from nothing, maybe then tries to build up a huge empire just through financial transactions or trading or using strategies, trading with other people if it's a multiplayer game, or trading with neighboring villages or trading with neighboring traders, stuff like that, and building his wealth, making strategic trades, backstabbing people whenever required. Or if not, you could play the game virtuously. Stuff like that. So from there, you think about what your game should have. So it should have a trading system, it should have a money system, something like that. Maybe people rob your money from you. So somewhere how you can lose their money. You should also be able to spend your money. So a shop, something like so. See, from just a small idea with people's real life motivations, you can start making a game. And an advantage games have is they aren't tied down by realism. Whatever you can think of, you can make. Films and music are similar, but game development has a lot of freedom. It isn't really financially or resourcely, it's not really constrained. If you are skilled enough and you have the time, you'll be able to make anything that you think of. So that is player motivations and inspiration from existing games. You guys would have played a lot of games. So, and whenever, let's say someone played GTA 5, the first thought when they think of making a game is, I want to make something like GTA 5. So something where people are able to uh, go around in cars, explore a city, perhaps attack people if they want to, complete missions, drive a lot of vehicles, maybe commandeer a helicopter, stuff like that. So that those are how you take inspirations from existing games. And let's say that is really a broad way of taking inspiration from existing games. A bit more, let's the focused way is taking a very specific or very well implemented aspect from a game and trying to implement that again. This will help you uh, improve your ideas and help you brainstorm ideas. It also improve the way your game development skills. There's a channel called Mix and Jam on YouTube. We'll send links to the stuff that I mentioned later on after the session is over. I'll just note it down. And that channel does stuff like this. So they take uh, well implemented or very new concepts from many games and show how to implement them in Unity. So that could be a starting point from where you build upon your game. So let's continuing with the thought of getting inspiration from GTA 5. Let's say this is your idea. You want a game where people move around and that they're able to finish tasks and stuff. And when you think about GTA 5, you realize that it has really high graphics, and you can't do that on your own. So then you reduce your scope. So you say that I'll have like models which look like cubes or which are very basic models. So they're not too detailed. They don't have like a lot of moving parts, stuff like that. Then you realize that the city is really big. If it's GTA San Andreas, it's a really big city, or even GTA 5, Los Angeles is a really big city. So, and you can't design that. You can't really uh, design the whole city on your own. So then your scope reduces a bit to a realistic level. I'm not telling you to. I'm not saying that your scope should be too small where it's just moving around in a car. That shouldn't be the way you ideate games. But you have to, and it shouldn't also be I want to make GTA 5 because that isn't realistic. And see, it's taking Rockstar over 10 years to make GTA 6. So see how hard it is to make a game, and keeping all of that in mind, you have to have a way of controlling the scope of your game and not allowing scope creep to come up. So what is scope creep? Scope creep is, let's say you have a small idea of a game, and as you're making it, you're trying to expand the game a lot more. So it's just a basic platformer as of now, something like Mario or some stuff like that. Then you want to add multiple levels. Okay, that's fine. It's good for the gameplay. Then let's say you want to add multiple characters which you can select in your menu and change based upon that. Okay, it's again helpful for engagement. Then let's say you want to make it multiplayer. See, the scope became too large. It's hard for one person to do. You'll be able to do it, but it's hard. And let's say you want to add really large levels or very high graphics. The scope increased a lot more now. And this is a very big problem when people are brainstorming ideas or when people are in making games. So it's very important to keep in mind the resources that you have, the constraints that you have, and based on that, have the scope of your game. And this is where the game design document that I mentioned about will come into play. We'll talk about that later. And other places where you can get ideas from are game jams. There are a lot of game jams conducted online, even offline. and stuff like hackathons, all of these have, they give out a theme or a prompt. There's a popular game jam called Ludum Dare, which always gives out like a couple word prompt, something like upside down or controls reversed or times up, stuff like that. And based on how you interpret that prompt, how you interpret that theme, you can start making games. And you'll have a fixed amount of time. Ludum Dare has 2 days to make a game. Other game jams have 7 days, stuff like that. But main idea is from the prompts of these game jams, even if you aren't participating, just going through the prompt, think about each one for a few minutes, think about each theme for a few minutes, and seeing how you interpret each theme. So let's say the theme is upside down. People can interpret it in multiple ways. Upside down, they could take it in the most literal sense where you're. Uh, if you have any questions, we'll take it towards the end of the session. So if you have any questions, please note them down. We'll take it at the end towards at 7 o'clock. So okay. So if it's upside down, you can take it in the most literal sense, saying that the whole world is just flipped upside down. So instead of, let's say uh you have 2 levels in your game, like this is the ground and this is like something a bit higher. Instead of you jumping from here to here, the world will be completely flipped upside down, something like this. And then the gravity will be acting upwards, all of that stuff. That is the most literal sense in which you can take this thing. How else can you think about something like upside down? Maybe your character is the only one, maybe it's upside down. So if you want to jump, you might have to like roll that will cause you to jump, stuff like that. That could be a way to interpret upside down. There are a lot of ways in which you can interpret upside down. Upside down is a bit more narrow, but there are a lot of other themes that game jams give. You can interpret in multiple ways. And from there, once you have this theme or this prompt, use all the techniques like mind mapping, maybe player motivations, and even inspiration from existing games or games that you've already made, and look at your scope and see what kind of games you can make. And there are also stuff like there are a lot of subreddits. There's Tumblr where you can look for game ideas. You can talk to people, talk to your friends, see what game ideas they have, and you can use all of these stuff to build upon that idea. The thing that I use a lot is an idea generator. There are a lot of websites that have game idea generators. There's something called YGD, there's indiegamedev.net. All of these things, they have um, game idea generators where they give you 4 or 5 different sections. So what is the core mechanic of the game? What's the setting? What's the final goal? What's the one new mechanic? Stuff like that. And based on that, they give you a fairly complete prompt. So there you just have to iterate upon it a bit, maybe using mind maps, and then you can start making your game. The one that I see utilized the least by people, by new game developers, and even I haven't used it much, I've used it only once or twice, is getting inspiration from bad games. What do I mean by bad games? Bad games are games which try to want to do something, fall short of doing that. And from those kind of games, you can see what they try to accomplish, see if you can replicate that and try to implement it in a way that's better than what they did. By bad, I don't mean bad art or bad story. I mean, I'm talking about bad mechanics or bad theme or a bad basic idea of the game or a bad implementation of the game be even more correct. It's a bad implementation of a good idea. These are the main ways in which you can brainstorm ideas. There are a lot more. Uh, First thing is if you have a small idea, think about it. One very important thing that I didn't mention here is you can take inspiration from movies. That is what we did for a few projects. You guys watch a lot of movies. You can mix and match a lot of movies to get a new game. Maybe a sci-fi movie, something like uh, Edge of Tomorrow, where you have something like Groundhog Day, where the day repeats again and again, and they have to kill the queen alien for the day to stop resetting. Or maybe something like Tomorrow War, where people get transported to the future and have to fight a war there, something like that. Or even a very simple game, maybe a detective game based on a good detective movie or good thriller that you watch. Those are all starting points, but never copies someone's idea as it is. Unless it's a mass game ideas where the main theme of the subreddit is game ideas that never get made. So if you're able to get an idea, try to ideate upon it a bit, think about what resources you have, what are your constraints, and from there you can start with other processes. The first thing, we talked about core mechanics, engaging mechanics. What is engaging mechanics? The mechanics are to the heart of the game's interactivity. They're what the player actually will use the most, will interact with the most, will use what the player uses the most to interact with the world to actually play the game. So it'll be stuff like jumping, where you have a sense of control, where you have a sense like where you're controlling the character. Once you press a button, the player jumps. So that'll show you control. When the player moves, it shows that you're progressing through a level, progressing through the game. That'll give satisfaction to the player. And also resource management. So let's say you're in a shop in your game and you have just 10 points left and it's a fighting game, let's say, and the shield is 8 points and your sword to repair your sword will cost 9 points. What should you do? Stuff like this. You have to take a strategic decisions, think about what obstacles or what things you're going to fight later on in the near future at least, and based on that, see what you have, think about what you have to invest in, stuff like that. We'll talk more about mechanics later on in the game design section. And this is one of the very important things when it comes to the story of a game. Whenever we say that the story of a game is really good or the narrative is good, it generally depends upon world building, how you craft a very compelling, very believable world, or at least something that is so outlandish that people just resign to the idea and actually start getting invested in the story. If it's something in between, which is like in 2024, there are flying cars and people have lasers attached to their arms. People just cut their arms off and like cyborgs, they have lasers attached. That is partly based in realism, partly based on sci-fi. So people might not like that as much compared to if you set the game somewhere in 2600 or something like that, 2600, 2654, something like that. It's a lot more believable that you might people might have that technology then stuff like that. So the world isn't just the backdrop of the whole game. It's actually what the story of the game is built upon. If your game has a really good world, the player has to interact with the world. Player's end goal has to somehow influence the world. The world has to influence the player. There are people in the world who whose being in the world can subconsciously makes them take certain decisions that you as a game developer actually program into them. But from the player's point of view, those choices that other NPCs make, all of these depend on the world. The world isn't just the setting in which a game is. Let's say in a sci-fi game, if someone chooses to ride on a horse, that seems out of place. If the characters are really, let's say, a really outlandish character, or really like character who's really extravagant, it might be. If you see a few people riding on horses, will immediately be taken out of the story, be taken out of the game because it seems out of place. So when you have an immersive world, that actually makes a player interact with it more and makes them immerse a lot more into the game. We'll talk more about world building and how you actually build worlds later on. So and programming. We had the three things are design, programming, and art. In design, it's about the game mechanics and the world in which it is set. So let's say coming to a mind map, a game mechanics of the platformer game, let's say, is that it's a platformer and maybe you shoot enemies. That might be a secondary mechanic in the game. And what's the setting? Let's say, as we talked about, it might be set in a fantasy world. You might be a Viking and you have to kill orcs or goblins. So that's your setting. Let's say if it's in a fantasy world and you have to kill cyborgs, you have to justify that. All of these, so you have to put a lot of thought into the design of your game. That I feel like is where you have to spend a lot of time in the beginning so that your game development actually goes smoothly and you actually make a cohesive product in the end. Come into programming. Programming is how you convert your ideas that you have on paper or in your head into actual games. So for a jumping mechanic, you have to program that so that when I press a button, the player's height increases by something. If I press, let's say, space button to shoot, there should be a small projectile that moves and hits the enemy. If it hits the enemy, you check whether or not it hit the enemy. If it hits the enemy should lose health, and your score might increase. Stuff like that. So all of this is done through programming. There are a lot of game engines. There are a lot more than what we have here. There's Unity. Unity is the leading game engine now in the world, where you can make really good 3D games and really good 2D games. The 3D games are not going to be on the graphics of the games aren't going to be on par with the games made with Unreal Engine, but they're actually really good. After the session, I'll send a few links to some of the indie games. Indie games are games that are made by independent people. So independent game studios, like people, a team of like 4, 5, 6 people, are independent people. Just a single person, 1 or 2 people working on a game. All of these kind of games are called indie games. And games that are made by large companies are obviously going to be a lot better in graphics, at least because they have a large team behind them. And most large companies actually use their own proprietary game engine that they make on their own, make in house. So that is Unity. The blue one here is this is Godot, which is a completely open source game engine, which is slowly coming to replace Unity in the 2D sphere because there's a huge shift towards FOSS, so free and open source software, out of which Godot is the leading open source game engine. Unreal Engine is the main game engine made to use to make a lot of the AAA games, which are really high fidelity games, stuff like God of War. Games like those are made using any game engines that are like Unreal Engine or Unreal Engine itself. And Unreal Engine is also used in a lot of virtual film production now. So instead of using green screens, so for TV shows like The Mandalorian, if you would have seen a few of the behind the scenes clips, they had a large cylindrical screen on which they projected all of the backgrounds and stuff like that. And that had and the movement of the camera, so the movement of the background as well, exactly lined up with the physical camera that the cameraman moves. So all of this, so the real-time processing of that, all of that was done in Unreal Engine. So you can hook up your real camera to the virtual camera in Unreal Engine and move it around, and that will, because it's a very resource-intensive engine, but it will give you equally spectacular results. CryEngine is the game engine used to make the Far Cry games. Corona is another decent game engine, used to be popular a long time ago. No relation to the virus. Game Maker Studio 2 is one of the most popular 2D game engines. It's paid, but it has a lot of functionality built in. Phaser is used to make games online for web development, web games. All of these also make games for web, but Phaser is primarily for web games. So there are a lot more game engines other than this, but these are the main few that are being used now. Coming to the last thing in the game dev trinity, we have art. So I have two games here. One is the one on the left and the one on the right. Let's say you're a customer and want to buy a game, and you see these two pictures. Which one would you prefer to play? Obviously, the one on the right, because it looks a lot more visually interesting. It has a lot going on, and it's actually really stylized compared to the first one. That is what most people agree with. But in reality, this game, the first one, has a lot more plays compared to the second one. First one is called Undertale. It's an indie game made by, I think, Toby Fox, made by a single person. Yes, Undertale. Uh, it's considered one of the first Metroidvania game. Yeah, a really good game. Yeah. But its art style isn't something that people are actually gravitated. People actually gravitate towards. The one on the right is called Ori and the Wisp, the Blind Forest. No, Ori the Blind Forest, I think. Ori the Blind Forest. Ori and the Wisp, I think, is the other one. And it's a game similar to Hollow Knight, if you guys would have played it. Very similar game, very stylized. But as I said, if your story, as we talked about in the beginning, if your game is really good, you have to have good art. But even if you don't have good art, uh, your game might be able to survive uh, commercially on just very good gameplay and word of mouth, as Undertale did, because it took a long time to make and it is one of the most popular Metroidvania games. And if anyone wants to make a game similar in this style, people always tell them to refer to Undertale and see what it does right, and from there try to get inspiration from Undertale and try to ideate upon their own games. Another game which has really good graphics, as I said, is Hollow Knight. Very similar games. There are a lot more games, and we have, so these are the main three things that we have. No matter how good your game is, if your art isn't visually appealing, by art I mean not just visuals but also sound, also music of the game. Actually plays a really important part in how people actually perceive the game and actually experience how they play the game. Uh, if you guys have played any game which has a boss fight, you would have noticed that the music before the boss fight and during the boss fight would be different compared to the normal music that plays. Because the change in music, you'll have a change in pace. From music in boss fights will be a lot quicker. That is to signify urgency, to signify that you have to fight. That will create emotions like that. If it's a slow, very mellow music that you have in the background, that'll it will generally signify that you have your own time you can take your own time. The creative game, you can play the game in whichever way you want. And sound effects also play a really major role. If you guys ever want to see if you think sound effects actually don't affect the game, try to play a game with the sound turned off and see how uh, not bad, but how uninteresting the game will feel. You won't feel immersed into the game because all of the small sound effects, let's say you're playing uh, a high production value game, the main reason that you actually like to play the game is the story and the visuals, but everything in the game. So if you're walking on sand, the sound that you're walking on sand, if you're walking on grass, there'll be a change in the sound. If you're swimming, you'll hear that sound. If you're going to a market, you'll hear people talking around. All of these things actually contribute a lot to player immersion in a game. And these are, yes, game will feel very unappealing. As I said, you won't feel immersed in a game. Those are the main three things the game definitely. And if your game is able to do all three of these well in the best case, or there games like Undertale which are able to do, see, Undertale's visuals aren't bad. They're actually good, but they aren't it isn't what you gravitate towards first. So your art can be stylized, but it shouldn't be too stylized as to when people say that your art is actually bad. So it actually sort of people are disgusted to actually see your game. So with all these three in mind, let's talk about a game which does all three of these right. Super Mario Odyssey, few of you might have played it, few of you might not have played it, but this game does all three of these right. Let's see how it does. So the main concept of the game is Mario. If you guys have played any Mario game, you know that there's Bowser and there's Princess Peach. So Bowser abducts Princess Peach and takes Princess Peach through all the kingdoms in this world. So Mario has an odyssey through it, using which he actually travels to each kingdom. And to actually power up the odyssey, he has to collect moons. And Mario also has to defeat a few bosses in each kingdom, has to finish tasks, stuff like that. And in the end, there's a fight with Bowser after you go to Bowser's kingdom and you fight Bowser there. Or then there's a ship there. From there, you go to Moon Kingdom and then fight Bowser there, if I remember properly. You stop Princess Peach and Bowser's wedding in the middle and fight him there, and that's the end of the game. But that's the main idea of the game, and we'll see how it does each thing right with a few examples. So coming to the first thing that we had, design, and let's specifically talk about game mechanics. If you guys would have played it, there's a mechanic called a capture mechanic where Mario has this hat called Cappy, and if he throws it at a few specific ones, I have only three listed shown here, but there are a lot more. There are a lot more stuff which you can throw his cap at, and you can actually capture them. And for a fixed amount of time, Mario actually possesses. I mean, Cappy possesses the body of that entity, and you can control it. That is a really innovative, a really new idea that it has, and I don't think any other game has implemented it, or if it has, it hasn't implemented this good and in such a large scale game. That is a really new mechanic. People like that a lot. Really, and that actually led to a lot of problem solving where in the first where you are taught how to use this mechanic, there's a really high wall which Mario can't jump, but there are frogs there. So if you capture the frog using the frog's high jumping ability, you can jump and reach the top of the wall. Yes. So those kind of stuff. So this game mechanic actually results in a lot of problem solving, and people actually have to think about how they approach collecting moons and stuff like that. And the main concept is about exploration and discovery. So you have to explore each kingdom, then collect moons there. And unlike Super Mario Bros., if you would have played it on the Nintendo DS or any of the previous consoles, there you have the game is mostly linear. You can always come back, but you have to finish if you want to finish the game, you have to go in that way, in a single way to finish the game. Go towards and jump on the flag, go to the cast, stuff like that. But this has an open world concept, similar to a lot of games that are coming out now. There's also Zelda Breath of the Wild, which is a really good open world game, which we'll talk about later on, which has a lot. So this open world design, you can explore to it, and you have to collect a fixed number of moons. But the world has a few more moons than that, so you don't always have to follow a single path. This also improves replayability. It's something very important in a short game. So if it's a long game like 70, 80 hours, people generally won't want to replay it. But if to improve players' immersion or players' interest in a game, it's best to have a lot of replayability in a game. So if you talk about a game with good replayability, there's Pokemon. If you play a Pokemon game, you generally started with the starter Pokemon and then catch a Pokemon in the first route. And then you go to the second route, maybe catch one, fight a gym leader, and from then on you'll build up a team of five or six or seven Pokemon. Let's say maybe one extra, and then that'll be the party with which you continue throughout the game. So the next time when you come and play the game, you can take a completely different starter. You can catch a completely different Pokemon in the first round, and you'll be with the large amount of options, large amount of Pokemon that you have. You consider some of the Gen 4 games, which have 494 Pokemon or something. You have a lot. You have close to 300 Pokemon which you can use. So this improves replayability a lot. And coming to Super Mario Odyssey's open world, it's filled with secrets. It has a lot of challenges. There are small things where you can just go finish a small challenge and collect the moon. And the capture mechanic is a really good design time, and that encourages problem solving. And it is a new take on the already sort of saturated platformer genre in which Mario is the biggest game. And how is it a programming? Coming to the second thing, programming, the second pillar of that design trinity, game dev trinity, it's programming. Uh, See that Mario swimming over here towards the bottom right. When he's swimming, and let's say you move the joystick on the Joy-Con if you're playing on Switch, the response is almost instantaneous. And if you jump up, you can start ground pounding. Let's say you're walking on the ground and you jump up and start ground pounding, and from there you jump up again. All of these, and if you look at how speedrunners play the game, they have to make specific, like they have to input specific controls in frame or two with a frame or as 2 frame precision. All of these require very optimized games, so where there's no lag between what you see and what you're doing, because if the game lags a bit, if you had to press something on the first frame and you end up pressing it on the third frame, you might have missed the window. Stuff like that. So all of these and all the new mechanics, all of these uh, new mechanics being very seamless with very few glitches is actually a very good programming feat. So just programming a game isn't enough. Uh, if you have a good game idea and you start programming it, you and let's say you're programming it on a laptop and it's a 3D game, uh, coming towards the end of your programming process, you'll actually come to realize that your game doesn't run properly on any device. Your device might have a lot more GPU and computing power, processing power compared to others. So it runs decently enough on yours. But if you want to port it to mobile, you have to have it. It has to be really optimized. If you want to port it to, let's say, web, it has to be a lot more optimized than mobile stuff. And if you have a really high fidelity game with high graphics, you can't always have that in the background. So that requires a lot of clever programming, which will make the game a lot more optimized, and also clever design tactics, which you learn as you progress. The third one, art. You can obviously see how beautiful each kingdom is designed if you played the game. We have Seaside Kingdom over here, which is one of the most beautiful kingdoms. A lot more, but this shows you that Mario games have always been really the art has always been really good, even from the beginning with their limitations on the Game Boy and stuff like that. But from then on, the art has always been captivating, and especially Super Mario Odyssey, and even games like Mario Kart and stuff like that. So the Mario franchise in general pretty much nailed all the design pillars proper, all the dev concepts. So this is a very good example of a game that does all three well. Undertale is a game that does the first two well. Art is good, but this isn't the first thing that you're drawn to. So if you are starting out, it's best to have all three nailed instead of focusing on one thing a lot more. That improves your skills a lot and also forces you to reduce your scope a bit because you also have to work on the art, you also have to work on good programming, you also have to work on a good mechanic and make it work proper. So this is a really good, at least base from which you can start thinking about game design, thinking about how to make games. As you progress on, if you go towards a bit more niche games or a lot more specialized games, the idiosyncratic games, let's say, then this is stylized art. It depends on how you actually make it. There are a lot of 3D games that instead of 3D games, I'll say games that look 3D, but are actually made in 2D with uh, all the textures. making the game look like it's in 3D. And there's also about how you actually store the textures. There are a lot of different ways in which you can store textures. You can actually load textures, how you have them storing in the background. All of these are very important stuff when that you have to consider if you're making a large scale game. In the beginning, all of these are not very important, but when it comes to stylized games, you have to actually put a lot of thought into how you actually are going to implement that. Because let's say there are these anime that might look 3D, but all of these are done in 2D mostly. That saves on a lot of processing power, and you generally get the result that you need. And there's also a episode in Love, Death, and Robots, which is 3D, but it's stylish look in 2D. All of these are things that you have to keep in mind while making your game. But in the beginning, it's best to stick to simple stuff. And once you get a bit more experience, and try to experiment a lot more. So coming to the second thing that we wanted to talk about, the game design fundamentals. We've talked about core mechanics, we've talked about world building a bit. So let's go a bit more deep into all of these stuff. And the third and most important thing in a game is engagement in a game. If your game is good, but after the first level, there isn't nothing new that the game offers, the engagement will steeply drop off. We'll see how to keep up engagement, what your hook should be. So the hook is the main part that actually draws players to the game. The line is, in this case, the hook, line, and sinker is something that refers to fishing, if you guys know. And the line is where this thing got it. And it's also used a lot in basketball as well. So the line is the way the story progresses, the different parts in which you maybe incentivize the player to play a bit more, have some things that require the players immersion, require the players engagement a bit more. In the sinker is one good thing that makes a player come back to the game again and again, or at least if it's a long game, make them finish the game. So coming to core mechanics. Core mechanics are, as we talked about, the, the main heart and soul of the game. The rules on which a game is based upon. So if you're making a platformer game, the rule is, and it's 2D. So the rule is you can only move left, down, up, and right. So left, right, and up and down. Uh, and you can shoot enemies with a gun, let's say. You can't trade. That isn't part of the game. That isn't one of the rules of the game. If you want to, similar to Party mini games, you could. Stuff like that. Your core mechanics are stuff that actually define how the game actually plays out throughout the gameplay. And so these are the main mechanics. You can also have a lot more side mechanics that a lot of games have. So all of these mechanics combined are what actually uh, cause player to face challenges, what actually make them think, what actually require their input. If the game is very simple and it plays on its own, there isn't much to the game. So the core mechanics are things that are very important in the game, and let's see what main core mechanics. There are five main core mechanics: exploration mechanics, action mechanics, resource management mechanics, role-playing mechanics, and strategy mechanics. Resource management mechanics are pretty straightforward. These are stuff like having a currency system in your world. Your world might have its own currency. It might have trading stuff like that, or you might have, if you guys have played Sword Fight or not Sword Fight, okay, Shadow Fight. With the Shadow Fight games, there once you level up, you have to use your levels either towards improving one skill or another skill, and you'll have your a whole skill graph, which based on what skills you improve, your attacks and stuff get better. So that is another way you have to manage your resources. Action mechanics are stuff like main stuff like fighting, how you actually progress through the game. It also includes stuff like how you actually move through the game. So if you come to the example that we took before, Super Mario Odyssey, you have jumping, you have walking like every other game. you have sprints as well, but you also have ground pounding. You also have double jumps where you can jump off Cappy and stuff like that. All of these are, and these are where you can have new mechanics. Resource management, it's generally roughly the same. Almost every game has that has a currency system has it in a way, in a similar way. Action mechanics are where players' input is actually needed, and that causes something to happen in the game. Exploration mechanics is what are the ways in which they explore the world, not just movement, but not movement, but stuff like what are the how do I put it? A better way is let's say about how you discover new areas in the game. And if you would have played at like how do you look at if it's a detective game, let's say, how do you look at clues? What clues you have in the game? Sorry for that. What games you have? Like, what clues you have? You would have played something like the Professor Layton games. You have another extra magnifying glass which you can look at specifically like examine a few spots to find clues or puzzles, something like that. Spider-Man swinging also comes into the action mechanics because that is the way in which Spider-Man moves. But let's take Super Mario Odyssey again as the example. So Mario actually moves by walking, jumping, running, stuff like that. But his Odyssey is another way in which he can explore the world. Capturing is part of the action mechanic, but it's also way in which you can explore the world. You can explore places that are otherwise unreachable if you just are controlling Mario, stuff like that. It's also about how you access hidden areas, how you can uh, think about, let's say you got some clues or you got some information, how do you decode that? So how do you explore the story of the game? Stuff like that are part of exploration mechanics. Strategy mechanics are something that all gen strategy games have, which are like if you come to think about it, it's like all the problem solving puzzle games, all of these have stuff where you have to make decisions, maybe move stuff around to to be able to clear a level, kill specific enemies, but leave specific enemies living so they help you finish a level, stuff like that. So all of these are part of strategy mechanics, and role playing mechanics is where you uh, it's how your player is able to customize their characters and how they're able to progress through this game. And this also involves stuff like skills, how they acquire skills, completing missions, talking with people, building relations, all of these kind of stuff. Talking with people in game, talking with NPCs, building relations, building their skills, building people's skills, forming clans. All of these stuff are part of role playing mechanics, forming armies, and how you immerse your player in the game. All of these are part of role playing mechanics. These are the five main core mechanics of a game that you can have. With these, you can think about what, let's say you want to make a game, you can pick one mechanic from each of these and using all five of those, try to think of a game. Then maybe lean into one thing a lot more and then do something else, stuff like that. Game development and game design specifically, or ideation is always an iterative process. Once you have an idea, try to build upon it, think about whether it will work or not. If it doesn't, come back again and try to improve upon it. If it does, see if there are any ways in which you can improve it again. And that your game will never be finished. That is a very real thing that people have to think of, have to keep in mind. If you have a game idea in mind, your game will never be finished. You'll always have something or the other that you want to fix, something or the other that you want to improve, something new that you want to add. But it's your responsibility to, as I talked about earlier, uh, not let scope creep, not let your scope creep upon you to make you to get you completely out of your depth, and you have to also know when your game is ready to be published or ready to be released. Coming to the second thing in the game design is world building. World building, uh, as we talked about, isn't just your world isn't just the background on which a game is, but it's very immersive, and I said it should be believable. We have two very good examples here. Almost everyone would have watched the Avatar movies. The world that they built there is that Earth is almost destroyed, so people from Earth go to Pandora to look for resources to find unobtainium, and there in Pandora, they're the Navi people. Those are these 9 foot tall, thin blue aliens which uh, live in the jungle, fly around on these, what they do, stuff like that. And there are people trying to kill them to uh, get the unobtainium. See, this is very, as I talked about, very outlandish, so very far-fetched to be true. Something like Star Wars, it's very similar. And the other one, Pacific Rim, people might have watched. So even this is very good example of world building where there are kaiju monsters that emerge from underneath the ocean. There's a sort of rift between our dimension and their dimension underneath the ocean floor. So they come up to that, and people have built these robots to fight and kill these. As more and more are getting killed, stronger and stronger kaijus are coming out. People have to build a lot better robots to fight them. This is a really good, and your main character is one of the pilots of these. That and their twin dies in the first movie, so they're set up to do that stuff like that. All of that is immerses you into into the game or immerses you into that world. So now you're completely invested in that, and you're like, I'll see what's going to happen. So, and one more thing about game development is about your world specifically is after people play your game, people should be continuously thinking about it. So think about new scenarios. Let's say you watch a really good movie with a really good world building. After the movie is done, you'll think about what will happen next. What if you were in that place? What if you were in the place of, let's say, Jake Sully? What would you have done? If you were in the place of, I forgot his name, the guy in perspective, what would you have done? All of these stuff are people actually I think about that are actually talking about your game well after they've played it. That means you've done something right. So how do you go about world building? Main thing is you can have a top down or bottom up approach. Bottom up is start from the complete base, so like where it is set. So is it an island nation? Is it the first thing is it fantasy? Is it sci-fi stuff like that? From there, is it an island nation? Is it surrounded by a lot of other kingdoms? Is it in the middle? Is it on a mountain? From there, you think about from there you think about who live there, what their relation to the story is, what they do, what a character does, how do these people interact with your character, what is your character supposed to do, what is their aim, how do they go about achieving this. All of this is one way to think about how you build your world, and based on that, you use what is most sensible to build it. The other way is you know what a character has to do. So for that to happen, who should live here? So let's say your character is looking for a cure for an incurable disease, let's say. So all of these stuff are set in a fantasy realm. So for that, you need to have a wizard or a mage, something like that, or, or an alchemist. For them to exist, there should be a good bustling city with a good market around, stuff like that. And it should be a good castle. It's set in medieval times, obviously. That is our future fantasy world, so something like that. From there, where is it set for? Let's say you can't find it in your kingdom, so it should be transported from. It should be imported from somewhere else. So how is it imported? Is it imported by water, so that your kingdom is as the one you see here, has a huge river flowing towards it, or is your kingdom in the middle of a large group of other kingdoms, or is close to a lot of other kingdoms, and there's a forest in between where people travel through to transport goods and to move around. From there, and that is one way to build your world. Whatever you do, the player and their aim should actually be fitting and should be believable in that. Otherwise, it won't be immersive. And one more way, you can use maps if it's a fantasy game. That's generally where how people build their worlds, they draw maps. One very interesting way that people use to build fantasy maps is they take a handful of rice, they take paper and they drop all of that rice on the paper. And they trace the outline of that, and whatever it is, you'll have small islands if there are a couple of rice grains. If there are a lot of rice grains clumped together, that'll be your main landmass. If there's a lot of rice grains like this, but with the opening in between, the hole in the middle, that'll be your that could be a river or a pond, something like that, or maybe a mountain. So all of the possibilities are endless. And your narrative also needs to, all of these, your narrative, your maps, all of these have to add to your world, but not subtract or feel alien to what your world is or what you're trying to do. So a well-built world actually shapes the gameplay, it challenges the player, and also causes player interaction. Otherwise, if it's really poorly, it's not a really interesting world. Players will actually forget that they're in a fantasy setting, in a sci-fi setting. They forget about the world completely and just play the game. And if you don't have any challenges where people from the world actually talk to the player, or the player has to influence something in the world, and your environment is dynamic that influences players' actions to actually change it, that will cause your game to be a lot more immersive. Talking about immersion in games, games are more than just twitch reflexes. They can be a journey that takes players to new worlds and lets them experience stories in a way that no other medium can. So as I talked about earlier, and this is by Amy Henning, the director of Uncharted. If you guys would have played the Uncharted games, there's also a movie from Holland and Mark Wahlberg, I think, Uncharted movies. So all of these um, games, any good game in general, actually has a lot of power to immerse a player than movies have. No matter how impactful a movie is, after that 2.5 hours, 2.5, 3 hours, let's say, you are separated from the world. You're just, for that 3 hours, you're an observer. You aren't the main participant. You aren't the main motivator of the story. But in a game, you have the front seat. You're the pilot of the game. Whatever you decide is how the game proceeds. So that provides a lot of new experience. And with VR coming again, you have a really good game, really visually stunning or very explorative game in VR that could change people's life. It could change their outlook on how they live their life. So games actually have a lot of impact, and the main place where from which you can start think about how we can emotionally impact players, how we can have a good experience, have a good playing, how you have new worlds is through world building. That is where you're. If you have a really good world built and have really good interactions, really good challenges, stuff like that with the world, then that will cause a lot. That will result in a lot more immersive experience than any other format of game. So coming to the third point in game design, it's engagement. How do you engage players? You have to capture their interest. As I talked about earlier, if the first level of the game is really good and everything else is the same, they won't really continue playing the game. So there has to be a reason for them to continue. The same level copy pasted 20 times with just a few different enemies. No one will actually play the game. But if you have different mechanics introduced, let's say in one level you have your ground is just flat with all of these. It's a platformer game. The simplest game that in all of these is a platformer game. So let's say you have the world is flat. You have a few there's a floating island. You have a few blocks that you hit. You have a few enemies. Let's say you don't have enemies in the first level. So the first level is just going to be how to teach them how to play the game. Second level you might add enemies. Third level you might have lava pits in the middle which the player has to jump across. In the fourth level you might have a few blocks that the player has to activate, activate, and within a specified time they have to that'll let's say in a specified time that will activate a door or it will open a vault, something like that. And the player has to go and collect that or go through that door in the specified time, or it closes again, so they have to do it again. All of these kind of stuff. So if it's a platform again, having a new mechanic or a new way to use the same mechanic to finish a level, that will motivate players to continue playing a game and actually finish it. Mm, If you have, and your game shouldn't be at the same difficulty always. A good example for that is Subway Surfers or Temple Run. As you progress in the game, your speed increases. There are a lot more obstacles, but they're equally good rewards. So if you have a high score, you get a lot more coins. Have an opportunity to collect a lot more coins. All of these stuff. So your game's difficulty should scale along with the progress, and so should the rewards. Only then will the game be engaging, and players will actually play and finish it. So how do you sustain interest in a game? You have to have a variety of uh, mechanics, maybe small ones that add to and boost your core mechanic. There have to be good goals and objectives. There should be a difficulty curve, but shouldn't be too steep, because if your first two levels are really easy and the third level is extremely hard, your retention will fall off after that. There should be rewards that acknowledge people's achievements. So if they've defeated a really hard boss, the reward should be given accordingly. So the loot that they get should be according to that. They shouldn't get the same loot if they defeat a boss which has 100 health, and they shouldn't get the same loot if they defeat a boss which has 10,000 health. So all of these are stuff that you actually see in games but might not actually think about when you're making your own game. But these actually play a really important role in player retention and their experience. If you look at the graph on the left, players start at a neutral point per se, and if they fail a few missions, and if they fail a few missions, then they get anxiety. They feel like the game's a bit hard. But when it is almost at their threshold of anxiety that they can take, then if you give something like a gift pack or introduce the offer, something like that, that will help ease them into the game a bit more. And that will make the game a bit easier for them to play. From there, as they go on, and they feel like the game is getting a bit harder, then you can have few more rewards. But your game should never be in between easy and hard. You always, based on the game style, it's better if it is somewhere on the side of hard. Because the game has to be challenging. If it's at the same difficulty level throughout, or the player feels the same ease throughout, that won't result in an interesting game. So it should have a slight increase in difficulty, which will always correlate with slight anxiety. But that is another reason why people actually play games. Feel anxiety, to feel the rush. So these are the main things on how you design a game, what you should look at when designing a game, how you should approach stuff from brainstorming, then thinking about your ideas, what your design is, the world setting, how you program your game, all of these stuff. So we'll have an exam. I'll talk about one more game as I mentioned before, Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild. This is a game that has all its design elements. Not sure if we are allowed to send the PPT, I'll send it. Not sure whether we're allowed to or not. But uh, so this game is one of the games that does all of the design, which has all of the design concepts really well. One thing, let's say it has a physics-based gameplay where you have objects which conduct metal, which are metal that conduct electricity, or you could cut down trees in the real world to build bridges, stuff like that. So there's a lot of situations where physics is actually used to make the gameplay a lot more immersive and expansive overworld, as we've talked about earlier. So it's open world game, the complete world of Hyrule, world that it is set in. It has a lot of mountains, plus it has plains, it has deserts, it has forests, all of these stuff. Each place having its own biodiversity per se, which creates a lot more immersion and makes the world feel believable. Let's say in your game you have the same uh, mob in Minecraft terminology throughout the in every single biome. That won't make the game feel. That won't make your world feel immersive. It won't make your world believable, right? So that is one thing that another thing that Breath of the Wild does really well. And having the open world and letting your player take on challenges as they in the order that they wish, instead of having a set order, that actually makes each player's experience different, and they can tailor the way in which they play to their own preference. Like, so if they want to fight the hardest boss in the beginning, they could somehow grind up all ammo. They could get all the bows and many kinds of arrows and try to defeat the one of the hardest bosses in the beginning. They have the option to do that. And the more you explore in the game, the more rewards you get. So you get more different kinds of weapons, you get more abilities. Story opens up a lot more, and that encourages players to veer off the main path and venture into different beaten paths. So instead of following on the main storyline to progress through the game, it also influences players to check out every single side, to do every single side quest, including collecting those 900. I forgot those some just really time-consuming achievements that it has, but that encourages players to explore the world a lot more, and in turn, exploring the world encourages players to do a lot of the missions. That encourages players to explore the world a lot more, and this is cyclic positive feedback, which is really good for your game as a developer. There are also different kinds of challenges. You have boss battles that you have puzzles. Can you hear me now? 1 minute, guys, I'll be right. Look, can you hear me now? Oh, yes. The headphones, they ran out of battery, so I had to connect the wire. So where was I? Yes. Okay. So having different challenges, so you can fight various bosses. You also have a lot of puzzles in the shrine, and uh, one more slight challenge is how do you manage your stamina when gliding or when jumping, when running, to manage your stamina. So shouldn't get tired, lose your stamina before you reach where you want to reach, or lest you might fall into the hands of an enemy or a boss or something like that. So all of these small puzzles, including these larger ones, offer a lot of variety in what the player can do, and that makes the game not feel monotonous. So players, if they are bored fighting bosses, they can go and do the puzzles. They can go collect, do the side quests. All of these stuff make your game a lot more captivating and a lot more exciting for people to play. And they have a lot more reason to play. And also, as you progress through the game, getting new abilities, getting new equipment, all of these, and getting access to previously unreachable places in the game, that creates a sense of growth and advancement that you have. And all of these mechanics work in perfect symphony, in perfect tandem, which makes Breath of the Wild one of the very best games of the past of 22 or 23, I think it came out, but one of the best games of that year. So that was we have. We looked at an example on a game with a good, which used the game dev Trinity really well. Game that has all three main concepts of game design really well. So now let's talk about the game design document. Game design document is, and this game design document is very important when you want to make any game, because this is a blueprint of your game and it defines everything from the beginning of what you want your game to be. including the game's concept, the mechanics of the game, so the core mechanics, the playable stuff that it has, the story of the game, the art style should be stylized, should be 2D, 3D, should have a cartoonish look, all of these stuff, what your level should be and how you are planning. Preferably make before you actually start programming your game, so that and you have to make this with the scope of the game in mind and with the resources that you have in mind, so that once you go once you progress to making the game, you might actually, as we talked about earlier, you might get scope creep and you might want to implement a lot more features than you actually have time or have the resources for. Can you guys hear me? A few people are saying that you can't hear me. Okay, very low voice. Let's see if I can change that. Am I audible now?
Yes.
Oh, okay. I don't know what happened, but uh, okay. So to avoid all of these, you have to have a game design document from the beginning of your process itself. So the game design document from any you use models or assets or music or anything that you haven't made, you will keep a track of all of that so that you can give proper attribution later on when you publish the game or in the end of your game design cycle game process. And it also has everything from the single idea from which you would have started ideating, and has everything that your game actually needs to that your team needs to make the game, or that you need to make the game. This is something that almost everyone, even I haven't done in a few of my projects, but no matter whether you're a beginner or you're a very advanced game developer, you're always advised to have a game design document, so that even if you know that you won't get scope creep, even if you know that you won't stray away from your vision, you'll have a track of everything that you've done instead of just your final product. This is sort of like a report of your game, which is always helpful to have. And you can always refer back to this to see what you did, or let's say you implemented something or you use some asset now, and 3 months down the line you don't know how you implemented it or where you used it from. So to if you have a record of all of these in your game design document, then you can easily go back and see what you've done if you have to make any changes. Because in the 2 3 months you would have become a better programmer, then you might implement this in a different way, might follow a different tutorial, which almost everyone follows tutorials to make games, or at least to code specific parts of a game. So uh, if you have a game design document, that always helps, and it's what most people neglect doing. You make a game design document when you start ideating, when you get the first idea. From then you need to have your game design document. But the all of these stuff it's best if you have your concept, your core mechanics, story, everything finalized before you make the game. But it's generally not the case. If not, and it shouldn't be too malleable. You should have a strict idea because as you progress through the game development process, you might want to add a lot more features that you actually can't. So it's better to have uh, most of your GDD done. Only add on the models that you've used, maybe the sites that you've referred to program something, or the inspirations that you've took to programs or to design specific stuff. We'll share a few example GDDs. There are also single page GDDs which have a condensed version of everything. There are also multiple page GDDs which most big scale game developers use, which keeps track of every single thing that they do, which increases accountability in the game, obviously, if you have a team, and also makes you this keeps you on track. So if you have a GTD, you can actually plan your timeline well in advance and go through the process, right? Well, those are the main things about game development and game design and how you should ideate upon a game, where you can get ideas from, what you should think about while making a game, how to build your world, what type of core mechanics are. So these are just and how what you can do to improve player engagement, improve player retention. So like all of these stuff are what we've discussed in this session. From the next session onwards, we'll start actually making games. So in the next session, as we talked about in the beginning, let's go back to the first slide. So this is the first one, which is just a welcome and course overview. Second day, we'll have PyGame, which is we'll make a 2D game, a basic 2D game, where people who are very new to game development will actually learn the concepts. We'll just have a feel of have a taste of game development. The next 2 days, so day 3 and 4, will be about Blender. So you'll after this, in 2 minutes, I'll talk about how to install and set up Unity, Blender, and Pygame. Just give me 2 minutes. And the last 3 days will be about making a 3D game in Unity. So in Unity, we first-person shooter. There are enemies which, if you am I still not audible? I don't know. Maybe some people are having. Oh, okay. Oh, okay. Okay. This. Take my headphones off and see better. Is it any better now? Okay, yeah. Anyway, we're in the last 10-15 minutes of this session, so we'll finish it up. Okay. The last 3 days, we'll be making a first-person shooter in Unity. And in that, you'll have enemies. If you shoot the enemies, your score will go up, and the enemies can also shoot you back. If you want, and if you have time after the session, after these sessions, you can try to do your own research and try to add upon what we've made in the game in these sessions. But you're always free to do whatever you choose. Okay. So now we'll come to installing Pygame, Unity, and Blender. I'll share my screen. Screen. Okay. Can you guys see my screen now? Okay. Okay. So first we'll go through installing Unity. To install Unity, you can just go to unity.com, and there you'll go to unity.com. The first thing you'll see is download. Go to download and click download again. Unity Hub will start downloading. So once you download Unity Hub, you have to set up Unity Hub, which isn't a big deal. Then you have to choose a version of Unity to install. I'll show you that. Just a minute. Okay. Okay, so you install Unity Hub, uh, and once you install Unity Hub and you create an account, Unity account, don't think you have to create a Unity account, but if you create a Unity account, then all this is straightforward. Unity Hub will open up this way, and these are all of my projects. But under install, these are the different versions of Unity that I've installed. I have 2022.3.3.0, 3.9, 3.10. So you go to install and install this, the recommended version. Don't install the latest one, install the recommended version. Either this or this, anything will do. And once you install, say I'll install this, it'll give you a lot of options, different platforms to which you can build. So if you select Android build support, it'll download OpenJDK and Android SDK and NDK tools with the development tools for Android. So once you make your game, you can actually export it and get APK files and actually upload that to Play Store or send it out to other Android devices if you want to. But now everything that we are going to do will be on Windows or Mac. So if you have a Windows, select Windows. If you have a Mac, select Mac. So iOS, tvOS, Vision OS is for these the new headsets. Linux, Mac, uh, Universal Windows build platform. Select Windows build platform if you're build support if you're Windows, and select Mac build support mono if you're Mac. Don't do server stuff because servers are for multiplayer games. If you want to do it later, and after that, if you know how to set up, if you've already set up Visual Studio Code for Unity with IntelliSense using the video that you sent in the group, good, and it's working good. Otherwise, you'll also, it's best if you download Visual Studio Community because that already comes. You can select to download all the packages required for Unity in that. You can download documentation if you want to, but you'll always, if you want any documentation, you'll be obviously be searching online. So for now, select Windows if Windows, Mac if Mac, and later on, if you want, after this is done and you want to port your game to Android or something like that, you can just uh, click on this settings and go to add module. You can add everything, add anything that you want to add. Then once it's installed, you essentially have Unity on your laptop, on your device, and then you can start making games. So you create a new project. You'll have a lot of templates. Select a 3D if you want to make a 3D game, save it somewhere in some location. And when you don't use Unity version control unless you actually know what Unity version control does. You won't advise to connect it to Unity Cloud as well. And if you, unless it's like the main game that you want to make and you want to work on multiple laptops, so maybe work on your laptop, then a PC somewhere, maybe in your home, something like that. Then maybe use this, but I won't advise you to use any of this. And if you create a project, you can, okay, if you create a project, then you can just start working. The basic overview of all of this. I'll give you a basic overview of Unity later if we have time. Otherwise, in the Unity session, the first 10-15 minutes will be about Unity's interface, the hierarchy, the inspector, the scene view, all of these stuff, and how to use Unity. And that is how to install Unity. If you install Visual Studio, you also, so sometimes Visual Studio Code uh, doesn't properly work even if you set up IntelliSense. I don't know why. If you're able to get it working, good. Otherwise, install Visual Studio. So install Visual Studio installer. You can, if you go to available, you can install stuff. Once you install, it'll ask you to select one of these. Here you have a lot of stuff. You'll also have one thing called C Sharp, and you'll have Unity's logo next to it. Select that and click install. So all of that will get installed. And whenever you start using Unity and want to program something, it will automatically open up. It'll automatically open up Visual Studio. If you have Visual Studio Code installed and that is working, it'll automatically open up Visual Studio Code. So that is how to set up Unity, how to install and set it up. Blender is again straightforward. Go to blender.org, not blender.com. You go to blender.org, just click download. Uh, just my internet is a bit slow, so If you click download Blender, the Windows installer will start downloading. And then it's just simply following the steps in the installer. There's nothing else that you need to set up. And once you install Blender, this is how it's going to look. We'll have a sample scene setup. Have a lot of stuff. General, where you can make a general thing to fit stuff for 2D animation sculpting. You can also make VFX in this. You can do video editing as well. So Blender is a complete platform. I think you can also make games in Blender. I'm not sure, but so these are all of the things that you can do. Blender is again open source, unlike Unity. So all of how to use Blender and everything will be covered in the third session. So third and fourth session about Blender. So the third thing that we're going to use tomorrow is Pygame. And to use Pygame, you need to have Python installed already. If you don't have Python installed, go to python.org and go to python.org. Just go to downloads. If you have Windows, go to Windows. Or even if you go to downloads, just download Python, the latest version of Python that you have. And once you install that, if you already have it installed, Python has a way of installing. Okay, Python has a way of installing stuff called pip. Okay. Python has a way of installing stuff called pip. If you know how to use it, good. Otherwise, you can find tutorials online of how to set it up. So once you have pip installed, and similar to how you install any other package in Python, Pygame using pip. Sorry for my handwriting, but mouse. But so using pip, you install Pygame, similar to how you install any other Python any other package. It'll take hardly 5-6 minutes maybe to install Pygame. Unity will take a lot of time to set up in the beginning. Plus, if you install Visual Studio, that will take a lot more time. And Blender is again similar to Python, it won't take much time. For Python, you can use any editor that you prefer, but it should have Python support. So for an editor to be able to use Python, you have to add Python to one of your path variables in your Windows environment variable. So we'll send a few videos in the group and even the teams this thing about how to set up Pygame for Python, a detailed this thing, and how to set up Unity as well. For Blender, there isn't anything that you have to do. So these are the three things that we are going to use for this course. And Pygame again is I use Sublime Text for Pygame. This is something that I made. If you guys know a bit of algorithms, this is I implemented A-star pathfinding algorithm, and this is just some random text editor. And if I build it, see, this is Pygame's logo. The Pygame opens up, and I can start running or playing my game. So this is the start, this is the end, and let's say this is a barrier in between. This actually finds the shortest path, assuming that you can't move through diagonals from the start to the end. So unlike Unity, Pygame isn't a game engine. Pygame is just sort of a construct on which you can make games. If you want to make games in C++ or Java or something like that, you need to have other libraries installed, like you need OpenGL. You want to make 2D games for 3D or something else. You have all of those just to draw stuff. But all of these are combined and you need to implement your own physics system. Similar in Python, you have to, in Pygame, you have to. But Pygame isn't as powerful as Unity or Unreal. It's not a game engine completely, but it gives you most of the tools that you need. So a game is just a drawing. If let's say a 2D game, its most primitive version is a drawing that moves based on players' inputs, right? That responds to players' inputs. So it gives you all of the functionality for that. In other programming languages, you need to program all of that from scratch using other libraries. The Pygame makes it a lot easier. So that's why whenever people want to program or to develop games, if they don't go for a game editor and they don't use their own game engine, they mainly go towards Pygame instead of other uh, programming language as far as ease of use. Right? So these are everything that we are going to use. So we'll use Pygame in the next session. So day after tomorrow to make a simple game just to get familiarized on what actually goes into making a game. The next two sessions will be about Blender, and the last session will be on last three sessions will be on making a 3D game of specifically a first-person shooter game in Unity. So you get a flavor of making 2D games, 3D games, and also making a 3D model, which is also going to be animated. So that is everything for this session, guys. If you have any questions, feel free to ask them now. Any questions regarding anything that we've talked about from the beginning? Installation procedure of what do you want? See, for if you already have Python installed on your device, it's very easy to install. It's very easy to install Pygame because it's just like installing another package. Similar if you install something like scikit-learn or something like that, you have to install those or any other thing. It's just installing another package. We'll send after the session is over, I'll send link to a YouTube video of how to install Python, complete procedure, how to install Pygame. And installing Unity is even more straightforward. You just go to unity.com, go to download and download it. Once you download it, so download Unity. It'll have the version or the one just before that. Don't go to the latest version. Go for previews now. So once you click install, it will ask you what platforms do you want to build your game. So if you want to build for Android, select Android, iOS, Windows, if you want Geo, this stuff. Once you select everything that you want to build your platform for, every platform that you want to build your game for, and like you don't have Visual Studio installed and Visual Studio Code isn't working for you, you can also download Visual Studio from here. You'll have a similar checkbox here and you will install that. It's installed, will say that it's installed. You'll be able to see it here. And it'll also open up Visual Studio's installer. That's the one that I showed you. Open this up, Visual Studio installer. Just that close and so I'll share will share YouTube videos, share links to YouTube videos on how to install Pygame, Blender, and Unity, or set up everything so that it works properly by the time we attend the next session. Okay, and for the game, we'll teach all the programming required. So we'll actually code stuff from scratch. Community channel, your voice is proper. Someone's mic is on. Okay. Okay, anyway, we are towards the end of the session. We're almost going to end it in the next 5-10 minutes. So we'll send videos on how to install everything. If you already have Python installed and Visual Studio Code, You can install Pygame from. I don't know whether you have Pygame on Microsoft. I'm not sure. I see. I don't think you can install Pygame from Microsoft Store. So we'll actually send videos about how to install everything so that your doubts get cleared completely. If you have any other doubts, message them in the group later once we share the videos. Uh, then, okay. So I'll take any other questions other than how to install. So someone asked, do you recommend any resources to read about what we learned? Uh, um, More than resources, I'll say look at a few YouTube channels. There's a YouTube channel called Game Maker's Toolkit. The Game Maker's Toolkit that uh, takes apart each, like delves deep into mechanic of each game. Or let's say they're talking about detective games. They'll show a few examples of good detective games, a few examples of bad detective games. Talk about why these work, why those don't work, all of those that stuff. Uh, we'll send links to all of these channels later. Everything that I'm talking about that I haven't covered in the session, I will be sending links to later in the WhatsApp group. I hope everyone is part of the WhatsApp group, right? I'll send links there. I have Game Maker's Toolkit. You also have I don't remember a few of the names off the top of my head, but I'll send a few more channels. All of these talk about game development from the design perspective instead of the programming perspective, which most game dev channels do. So all of these look at different ways you can. GMTK and Game Maker's Toolkit are the same thing. So Game Maker's Toolkit also hosts the GMTK Game Jam, which a lot of people who know game jams would be familiar with. GMTK and Game Maker's Toolkit are the same thing. The other one that if you want to learn how to program, we'll be sending a few videos later on again after the Blender session, how to program for Unity C# specifically. Um, and yeah, just let's see if I can find the name of the channel. Just give me a minute. There's a channel called Ask Game Dev again. I'll send links to that as well. Ask Game Dev is again another channel that um, talks about game development from the design and ideation perspective instead of the programming lens. So those, and if you have taken notes or if you just remember the names of the roughly the large topics that we've talked about, just search for them online. You'll get a lot of articles about, um, let's say, how to brainstorm for ideas, what what good art is, what bad art is, how to build your world, what good game mechanics are, how to think about game mechanics, all of these stuff, and how to make a design doc as well. All of these, you'll find a lot of articles uh, how to about what we've talked today. And you'll find a lot of articles on Notion as well. If you have Notion, you can look at that. Not Notion, sorry, Medium. There are a lot of stuff on Medium as well. Medium has a lot of articles on game development from the design perspective and also from programming point of view. So you have a lot of resources. We'll send you all the YouTube channels that I've mentioned in the WhatsApp group, along with how the installation and setup procedures of our Unity, Blender, and Pygame for what we are going to do in the next 6 sessions. So are there any other questions? Again, as I said, any links that I mentioned about will be sent in the WhatsApp group shortly. If there are no other questions, we'll end the session here and I'll someone raise their hand.
Hi, so I'm from the PM team of C5. I'm Utsav. Can you just make sure you download the attendance sheet for this class?
Wait, CH23 BTEC can't enable microphone. If you can, please type a message in the group. Okay, yeah, is Unity paid? Someone else said. Okay, Unity has three different pricing levels. The first one is personal, where you can use it to make any game that you want, and until your game makes $100,000 for the first in 12 months. If your game makes $100,000 in 12 months, then you have to use the professional subscription. You have to take the professional subscription of Unity and then use it. But for everything that we are going to do, Unity is going to be free, because none of us are going to make $100,000 grossing games in the next 3 weeks, 2, 3 weeks. Right? And if you have your own game dev company or part of this thing, then you will have to get the enterprise version. So all your complete company or your school can use it. And I use this on Linux. I think you can. Not sure. I need to check. I haven't really thought about Linux, but just a minute, I'll see. If you can run Python, you can run Pygame, obviously. Blender, you can also run it on Unity. And Unity also has a student version. I forgot to mention that. It also has a a student version, an education grant license version, and also okay, we'll download the sheet. Okay, so it can be run on Linux. But, uh, yeah, so Unity has student version. It has an educator version, an education grant license also for universities. It also has personal version that we talked about just now. It has pro and enterprise version that we've talked about, but also a industry thing that large companies can take. For us, it's going to be mostly free, or if you have a student email and your school is one of the participating ones or is recognized by Unity, you can actually use Unity Student, and you will get 1 year validity for your version of student plan of Unity, but you can renew it as long as your student ID will be active. Any other questions? We can mute you. Disable. Disable. I don't know. Settings. We can miss. I think if you guys have any questions, if you can unmute and ask, otherwise send message in the chat. And no other questions, I'll stop it here. If you guys have any other questions to ask and I haven't covered them or you haven't gotten a satisfactory answer, feel free to post all of them in the WhatsApp group. We'll try to cover as many as we can. Yes, this session is recorded. Yeah, we'll provide a list of everything that you'll need for the next session, and we'll also send links to stuff that we've talked about today. So places where you can learn more from, and also how you can set up Unity, Blender, and Pygame. I'm not sure whether I can share the WhatsApp group link here, but if you have access to this Teams thing, you can also ask questions in the Teams. This thing. We've taken care of attendance. You don't have to worry about it. We've taken care of attendance. You don't have to like give your attendance and stuff. So thank you guys for joining the session. I hope this was informative enough and I was able to convey everything in a way that you guys can understand and hopefully motivated you towards the next 6 days of what we're going to discuss. So thank you guys. If you have any questions, again, post them in the WhatsApp group or this Teams uh, chat or discussion, whatever it's called. And otherwise, I'll see you guys in the next session. So I'll take the Pygame one as well. I'll teach you how to make a basic game in Pygame. And after that, I'll hand it over to Soumya to take on Blender from this Friday. So see you guys in the next session on 19th Wednesday at the same time, 5:30 to 7:30. And thank you all for joining. Ending the recording here. Stop.